Victor, it's great to see you this morning.
Yeah, same here.
So, Victor, you wrote a hit book about 25 years ago about the plight of women who are trafficked from many countries, but especially from Ukraine, throughout various parts of the world. And now the situation for Ukraine, as you're well enough aware, about 6.2 million refugees are currently located in Europe and other parts of the world. The majority of them, of course, being women and children. You keep up on these issues, I imagine. What's the situation now with sex trafficking or human trafficking of people who've made their way to Europe?
Well, the one thing that worried me instantly when huge numbers of women and children were heading for the borders and trying to get out of or fleeing Ukraine because of the Russian invasion, right away I said there's going to be traffickers and their helpers trying to get women and children into their nets and capture them and take them off. And I knew it was going to happen, and it has happened. It has been cited in the U.S. State Department annual reports on trafficking in persons, and it is really, really bad. Women have disappeared, children have disappeared, and one of the things that if you look at, you just have to look at online escort services and where they're providing Ukrainian women. And you'll see over the last number of years, they've skyrocketed. They've really increased. And the thing is that so many young women who are leaving, who are fleeing, don't realize what could be waiting for them at the other side of the border. And right away, as soon as this issue started with fleeing out of the country, out of Ukraine, I knew that this was going to happen, and it has happened. The problem is very, very little has been done about it. Very little in the way of rescues. Very little on the part of the Ukrainian government. And I know the Ukrainian government's hands are filled with fighting the war inside Ukraine, but outside Ukraine, nobody's fighting the war for saving these women and saving these children from being trafficked into the prostitution trade, from being trafficked into pornography, all these kinds of things that are horrific to these young women and to these children who thought, wow, we're going to go for safety, and instead they end up in a nightmare.
How prevalent is this? Is this something that's occurring specifically in Europe or other countries, or do they usually, once they've entered into this, stay in Europe? What happens? What's the process?
Well, once they get grabbed, and I've seen this when I was doing the Nataschas, Ukrainian women coming across the border to work in Poland, suddenly finding themselves in Germany or France or Greece or Israel or even China and parts of Africa. They get into this situation where the traffickers know where to send them. I saw one in Bosnia when I was in Bosnia doing research, where they were paraded naked on a stage in a town called Tuzla, where and it was called the Arizona Market. And the women were being sold to traffickers. They were bidding on them so that they could take them to wherever, by car or by train or whatever, by ship. The trafficking, the worst thing about trafficking is people somehow get looped into it by believing that they're going to get a legitimate job, or believing this person, sometimes a woman, or oftentimes now a woman, is going to do something good for them. But they're part of the trafficking problem and the trafficking network, the criminal network that uses and abuses these people. When I was in Kosovo and Bosnia and places like that doing research, I couldn't believe how many 16, 17, and 18-year-old girls had been trafficked, upwards of 5,000, being abused by peacekeepers, UN peacekeepers, who were supposedly there to bring peace and stability to a war-torn area. And at the same time, they're doing their R&R, rest and recreation, by abusing sexually 16, 17, and 18-year-old trafficked girls. And you know how many of them were from Ukraine and Romania and Moldova and Bulgaria? It just shocked me. And, trying to rescue them and having guns pointed at me and asking the UN officials, why are you allowing these soldiers to do this? And they were saying, well, it's the local population. I said, the local population doesn't have money. They're impoverished. They're specifically there to be abused sexually by these soldiers who are peacekeepers with the United Nations. And, there was a big battle between me and the head of the United Nations peacekeepers unit because he was trying to deny it, except there were so many facts that I had and could prove it 100%. But, how do you rescue these girls and bring them back home? It seems like they will stay in these brothels in Germany, in France, in the Netherlands. They'll be in strip clubs in Canada. They'll be in strip clubs and in the United States. They're all over the place. And it's amazing how the network manages to get these young women and kids into these places. Children, I mean, like are 15, 16, 17. One of the things that I found when I was researching was the internats, the orphanages in Ukraine, where directors of orphanages were suddenly saying to a girl who's now aging out at 17 or 18, oh, Uncle Bogdan is here. He's never been the Uncle Bogdan ever in her life in the internat, but he suddenly appears, and then the girl disappears. She went into an institution, you exist in an institution, then you disappear. And the one thing that worries me now is these Russian forces stealing children from the orphanages, kidnapping them, bringing them into Russia. And my concern is what's happening to the teenage girls? I could tell you what's happening to the teenage girls. They're going to be trafficked because nobody really wants them except for making money on their backs. And that is a scary venture. How do you rescue these teenage girls? And that's what makes me even boil more, because nobody is actually saying anything or doing anything about it. I often wonder, where the hell is the UN? The UN could be going in there and saying, hey, you got to stop this and give us those children back. But no, they say, oh, this is happening. Oh, isn't that terrible? For me, every time I've dealt with the UN, I always leave with this. UN stands for unable. They're unable to do anything about any human rights crisis anywhere in the world. And particularly now, when you have orphanages being raided by Russian bastards, and the girls being taken away, and the boys being taken away probably for slavery on farms or whatever. Because, look, they're not doing anything humanitarian or good or whatever these liars in Moscow are saying. They have over 1 million children in internats or orphanages throughout Russia, and they don't want those kids. Why would they want Ukrainian kids? You have to ask yourself, why are they stealing, kidnapping Ukrainian children? And in particular, when you have teenage girls, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, I know what's going to happen to a lot of them, and it's frightening. It'll be internal trafficking throughout Russia and external wherever they send them around the world to be abused sexually.
And what is the life once a woman is trafficked into this and she ends up in, for instance, in your book, you discuss the Balkans at length. What is their day-to-day life like once they've been shipped there to work?
Well, they're told, you owe us 20,000 euros, 10,000 euros for your freedom. So you have to work it off. And they may be able to make 250 to 500 euros a day, servicing 5, 10, 15, 20 men a day, not being able to refuse anyone, being raped or physically beaten if they refuse. The horrific stories I've heard from young women who've been rescued, both in Italy and in Bosnia and Kosovo and whatever, in Israel, in France, in Spain, are chilling to the bone. Look, they can't run away. But, the authorities know where these places are. I mean, holy moly, when it was the UN peacekeepers, they all knew that every single brothel was beside a UN peacekeeping encampment. Didn't matter if it was France or Germany or England or Canada or the United States or Russia or whatever. They were there, and they were there specifically for the entertainment of the soldiers. And the soldiers were paying whatever they did, 50 euros or whatever per girl, whenever they wanted. And it was disgusting to go into these bars where these men were just thinking that these girls, actually, these teenagers, would give a damn about them. And you'd see the fear in the girl's face. When I rescued 6 girls out of a brothel in Ferazai in Kosovo, and that two of them were Ukrainian, two Moldovan, and one Romanian, and another Bulgarian. It was horrific to see what they looked like. And when you looked at their passports, you saw this nice young lady. And what you see in front of you is this terrified woman who's been a young woman who's been abused by hundreds of men, not because they wanted to. You know, one of the things I found out when I was talking to women and girls who had been rescued or managed to escape, none of them ever said they wanted this in their lives. None of them. And yet sometimes people from Ukraine or from Russia or from wherever around the world would look at these women and go, oh, yeah, whore, prostitute, slut. No, victim. The whore and the prostitute and the bastard are the men who abuse them because they should know better. You think that these 14, 15, and 16-year-olds or 22-year-olds or 23-year-olds want to be there because you fat slob? Somebody, wow, you look really sexy for them? There was one man, he was a fat pig. He had two women locked up in his apartment. He was working for the UN, locked up in his apartment in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, no, in Tuzla. And he would have them feeding him grapes and whatever and doing whatever they had to do. And when he left, he always locked the doors. They were barred so these girls could not escape. You know, the kind of stuff that goes on, it's just mind-chilling. And for me, I just get really pissed off and angry that not more is being done around the world. You know, look, this stuff has been on the books with the United States, with the U.S. State Department Trafficking in Persons unit since 2001. And nothing has changed. The countries are still as bad as ever. And it doesn't matter which country it is, whether it's India or whether it's the Netherlands. Germany is one of the biggest brothels in the world. Turkey, and you look and you see all of these foreign women. You know, when a country, for example, like Germany says, we're going to legalize prostitution, which they did, and now have discovered that it was the biggest mistake they ever made. And they look and they say to themselves, how many German women are lining up to work in the sex trade because they want to make it look good? Very few. 85% of the women in the sex trade have been trafficked in from foreign countries. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of Ukrainian women in the brothels in Germany and a lot of them in Turkey and other countries around the world. And people know that they did not go there because they wanted to be prostitutes. They were trafficked in, and they were trafficked in to what I call, you know, the prison of hell.
Viktor, I appreciate your very sobering interview. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.